Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I'm speaking with Mark Stuyt, Chief Engagement Officer at Neural Impact. This episode is sponsored by Ingram Micro Cloud. For those of our listeners who are involved in sales in the Microsoft channel, you may already know of Mark and the Neural Impact team. They've been crafting sales and marketing strategy for partners in the channel, including for Dynamics partners, for several years, and they bring together expertise in sales, marketing, and neuroscience in some fascinating ways. As the coronavirus pandemic has spread around the globe, Mark has continued to work with partners globally, albeit with less travel. Some of the same techniques and plans of selling in the digital world remain unchanged compared to in the pre-coronavirus era, but Mark also emphasizes things like selling via Teams, the importance of video at the individual seller level, and the role of new and perhaps unconventional tools. Mark also talks to us about Neural Impact's work with Ingram Micro, where they are developing even more tools to help partners sell remotely. Okay, Mark Stuyt, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on.
So as we get started, maybe I could just ask you for a bit of an introduction. I'm guessing a lot of our listeners, especially in the Microsoft Partner Channel, may know you, may know your name, but can you tell us a little more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Engagement Officer for Neural Impact, and we're a boutique consulting organization. We only work within the Microsoft partner ecosystem globally. And when people ask us, well, what is it about your organization that's a little bit different? Where I've kind of landed is there's sort of three things that we know extremely well. One is we deeply understand, obviously, the Microsoft community, the business models and things like that. The second thing that we know extremely well is customer acquisition, so that mastery of sales and marketing. And then the third thing, which is maybe the most interesting part of the work that we do, is the neuroscience and persuasion science. So we sort of try to bring that neuroscience kind of element to how Microsoft and its partner ecosystem goes about, designing offers, bringing those offers to market, and then collecting customers, over time.
All right, excellent. And yeah, I would just second. That's one of my favorite things from hearing you talk and hearing Sharka talk from Neural Impact as well. Some of those neuroscience angles are really one of my favorite things to hear your thoughts on. To get into the discussion today, obviously we're at an unprecedented time in what businesses are facing with COVID-19. Given your focus on the Microsoft channel, what has the impact of COVID-19 been on partners and partner pipelines?
Yeah, I think that's the best place to start, Jason, which is, what's the impact to the sales organizations out there? And what we basically seen is most active projects have been put on hold. Pipelines are drying up, not across the board, but across many different partner types. And it's really because organizations are having to make really hard decisions about what is optional, like improving my business applications or upgrading some underlying technology, versus what's absolutely essential to staying in business. So when you look at, well, what's the impact of partner pipelines? Organizations that are sort of maniacally focused on solving really important business problems that have kind of solid business cases behind it, well, that capital is still being applied to solve those business problems. Whereas organizations that have been, when I talk about organizations, I'm talking about partner selling organizations that haven't done a really good job of building an argument for why this is a critical spend at this point, well, they're seeing their opportunities disappear.
And what are the main differences that you're seeing right now when it comes to remote selling versus face-to-face selling that some sales professionals had been counting on?
Well, that's where a lot of this psychology really comes into play, right? So at risk of overstating the obvious, there is so much unconscious decision-making that takes place when a sales professional meets with a prospect for the first time, when they're doing a product demonstration to a broader community that they haven't met before, when they're delivering their proposal pitch and trying to close out a transaction. Right? So there's so much about what they do and how they do it that leads to prospects wanting to work with one partner versus another, or one sales professional versus another, or one vendor versus another. And kind of in this COVID-19 scenario that we're in, the sales professionals have lost all of the benefits that come along with being able to effectively drive that influence when they're meeting with prospects face to face. Right? And it happens both ways. So they don't get to communicate, the fact that they're trustworthy, that the fact that they deeply understand that prospect's industry, all of the things that kind of happen almost unconsciously in meetings. But at the same time, they've lost the ability to interpret, what kind of personality do I have on the other side of the table? How are they reacting physically to some of the discussions that we're having, and then kind of reformulating their sales strategies around this? So both sides of the equation now are working with a lot less information to make these informed decisions. And what we know about how the brain works is that the less information that I have to make a really hard decision, the higher the probability is I actually make no decision at all. So one of the things that I expect to see unfold over the near term is a lot of projects that had been forecasted to close are going to probably end up in a no decision because basically the buyers are going to err on the side of caution.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Well, that in and of itself, the prospect of that increase in no decision outcomes, at least in the short term, is stressful. But I just imagine that also, the reduction in face-to-face meetings, that alone can be stressful, I would guess, just as sort of the nature of human interaction even in a business context.
It really is. It really is. And just to tap into a little bit of the the buying psychology. We rely very, very heavily on something called a premature cognitive commitment, right? It's sort of a first impression. I meet a sales professional or a selling team for the first time. I form some strong opinions, good or bad, and that really helps shape how much energy and effort I put into that particular sales professional or that selling team as I go through my buying journey. And without that initial face-to-face session now, what happens is they don't really have any information on the back end to form early biases. So another kind of expectation I have, again, in the near term is without that early bias towards one particular vendor or seller versus another, what happens is the buying community is going to force the sales professionals and their teams into a lot more activities, which is going to significantly increase the cost to sale equation.
So what can sales professionals do to adjust as they face this separation?
Yeah, great question. And it's one of the questions that we're getting from most of our clients right now who are kind of reaching out saying, hey, our pipelines are stalled, projects are stalled, give us some ideas on what to do around this. And so again, a kind of risk of overstating the obvious, you want to be as personal as you possibly can right now with your prospects. And I think the easiest way to basically drive that or enable that is with video, right? So I'm going to start with a couple of simple examples, and then I kind of work through some of the more, what I'm going to say are the more sophisticated ways of leveraging video. First thing sales professionals need to do today, whenever they get on a phone call with the prospect, is to turn on their webcam. And they need to put some thought into the lighting that they have around them. They have to put some thought into the types of clothing that they wear. They have to put some thought into the background that's being displayed, right? Because whether it's right or wrong, all of those things will lead to some form of an impression. Right. And so if I have a choice between engaging with the sales professional, these discovery calls, certainly on the front end, can last anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Right? If I'm engaging with someone visually, there's a higher probability I'm going to disclose more. There's a higher probability I'm going to form a positive opinion. Clearly, this individual doesn't have anything to hide. Versus another sales professional who basically sticks purely with audio, just with voice. And to give you a sense psychologically of how that kind of plays itself out, the different parts of our brain are not wired equally. And so the part of our brains that are listening to the voice, like we're on a podcast right now, right? So the part of the listener's voice or brain that's listening to this is primarily anchored in the prefrontal cortex. That's where auditory processing takes place. It's also where our command center is. It's also where we make decisions about in or out, good or bad. And at maximum processing speed, it can move at about 40 instructions per second. So it's not a really efficient, powerful engine for processing information. But when you move to visual, if we were to move to video, all of a sudden I'm tapping into, that limbic system. I'm tapping into visual processing. I'm tapping into the emotions, and I'm tapping into 9 million instructions per second. So there's a whole different engine. It's like tapping into Azure when you're moving into video versus kind of being stuck with a 286. For those of you that are listening, understand what that is, in terms of leveraging just voice and language. So at the low end of that chain, right, we've got, turn on your video and make sure that you present yourself in a way that is going to be received. And that way you can kind of interpret what the prospect is doing on the other end as well. On a more extreme equation of that is whiteboarding. One of the most powerful ways of engaging people's brains, whether you're physically in front of them in a boardroom or you're remotely working with them on a whiteboarding app, is to shift away from the auditory interrogation process and move into a collaborative whiteboarding scenario, right? So set that up in the sales call and says, I'd like to learn a little bit more about your project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Microsoft Whiteboard app or one of the other tools that are available, and I'd like to walk you through a visual discovery process so we can learn everything we can about the project. And you're going to drive a radically different set of outcomes from a remote collaborative whiteboarding session than you ever will in an auditory discovery.
Okay, so those are a couple of pretty interesting methods. Are there any other either strategies that sales teams are setting out or other tactics that you want to mention?
There are. So again, I'm going to lean back a little bit more on, how do we leverage video to replicate that face-to-face engagement experience? One of the most common pieces of advice I always give to sales professionals is when you're thinking about sending out an email, ask yourself, could I actually send this out in a video format? Right. So every sales professional has a webcam. They all have recording equipment when it comes to obviously, headsets and things like that. And what we know is that there's a lot more engagement with video than there is with auditory content. So one of the assets that I encourage salespeople to send out, if they're trying to penetrate an account for the first time, you got a couple of choices. You can send an email that says, "Hi, I'm Mark Stuyt. I work with Neural Impact. Here's the work that I do. We've helped other organizations like yours accomplish these goals. I'd like to set up some time for us to talk. Would you be open to that?" And it's a very kind of a common format that you use to penetrate a new account. Well, just imagine instead of doing that, I record a short 90 to 120 second video that says, "Hey, I'm Mark Stuyt. I'm with Neural Impact. We work with these types of organizations, solve these types of problems. I've been on your website and it looks like you're going through this, that, and the other thing. Would you be open to, connecting so that we could talk a little bit more about how we could potentially help your business? And if the answer is yes, click this button. It'll open up my calendar and you can see what my availability is." So if I've got 3 different sales professionals all reaching out to me to try to kind of penetrate me as an account, I can tell you that video one I'm going to open up because I'm curious about it. There's a high probability I'm going to watch it to the end if it has the right structure, but the emails I'm probably going to delete. Right. So what we're encouraging partners to do is start to use video to create more of those kind of personal engagements, and then using tools like Vidyard to both send it out and also monitor who actually opens these things up and reviews them.
All right. So one of the other maybe ways to differentiate in the current market is surviving versus thriving. Can sales professionals actually thrive in this environment?
I really think they can. And so while most organizations right now are kind of looking at their sales teams in terms of, can we keep all the salespeople on? What I'll tell you is that there's a huge opportunity for organizations that are, I'm going to say, specialized. Right now, I like to use the word industry, but not all sales professionals and not all Microsoft partners really want to double down on a small number of specific industries. But if you do have deep industry knowledge right now, or deep workload knowledge, or deep specialization in a certain thing, and COVID-19 is creating business pain around that, there's a huge opportunity to go in there and help organizations grow their business. But if I don't know how COVID-19 is impacting a professional services firm, for example, as it's, compared to a manufacturing firm, compared to a retailer, compared to public sector compared to healthcare, it's going to be almost impossible for me to go in and break through the noise and say, you know what, I have a business solution that I think can help address some of your immediate problems. Are you interested? Yeah, I'm interested because right now I'm in an unprecedented scenario where I'm having to solve business problems I've never had to solve before. This caught everybody by surprise. So my belief is that you're going to see two things happen with a lot of the sales professionals and the partner organizations, that are actively selling right now. Those that have that deeper knowledge of an industry or a specialization, and it could be a workload specialization like call centers. Right? It could be a workload specialization like security and compliance. Right? So those are obviously a couple of key pieces right now where companies are spending money. So those partners that have that specialization and can go in and kind of wrap a Microsoft solution set specifically around a set business problem, I think you're actually going to see those partners grow exponentially. I mean, we've already seen it, at risk of overstating the obvious, in the modern workplace scenarios where all of a sudden, they're leaning upon MSPs and their value-added resellers to help light up remote workers that have never had to work from home before. Right. So there's lots of work down there. But I think once that initial sort of, we'll call it triage work is over with and people are functioning from home, the next opportunity set will be those with businesses that say, okay, it is what it is. We have these people in different scenarios. How do we help them collaborate better together? Right? How do we automate or drive our business processes in a more efficient way now that the world looks a little bit different?
Yeah, and I wonder also maybe from the other side if it's an organization, a channel organization that has not really focused like that before, whether you're seeing that some companies either are now really making that a priority to understand the specific industries or maybe specific workloads and specializations that they can help their customers with, or maybe on the flip side, if sales reps themselves, sales professionals are taking it upon themselves to now become expert, even if it maybe wasn't a priority for their organization, just for their own success. Any perspective there?
Yeah, that is a really interesting observation. So there's good news and bad news in that. So, when partners ask us, like, when's the best time to really start to think about, focusing in on a specific industry or a specific specialization, the answer to that is always 5 years ago. Because it takes time to build up that competence. But there hasn't been a single partner that we've ever worked with that didn't already have a competence built up in some area. In many cases, they were a little bit blind to it. So when we do like an inventory of their customers into certain segments, there's always one or two what we'll call bubbles where they have a higher concentration of clients in a certain segment. It doesn't necessarily mean they deliver the same solutions across those customers, but they do have a cluster there. And in there is where you generally want to start in terms of doubling down on an industry and or going in and, trying to help them through the challenges that they're experiencing right now, because you probably have a number of people within your organization that have industry and experience within that segment, whether it's manufacturing, distribution, professional services, or public sector, And there's another thing I kind of probably important to bring up, Jason, is, I get asked all the time, why should I focus on an industry? When I say yes to 2 or 3 industries, I'm saying no to a number of other ones, and that is the truth, right? And so, what I share is the most interesting thing that I have uncovered in the 10 years that I've been doing with this. Like on average, I might spend 100, 120 days of the year traveling. It's in front of a partner almost every day. And one of the exercises that we do commonly is we map out their sales process from start to finish. Like on a whiteboard, takes a bunch of hours. Like lead comes in, what are all the things that you do from the time you get that lead to the time you close it? And what's fascinating about that exercise is that more sales processes are more common than they are unique. And there are 3 basic sales motions that we have seen unfold globally, right? And we've worked in all corners of the world. And this seems to take place in the SMC segment, the SMB segment, happens certainly in enterprise. And there are 3 sales motions, and those 3 sales motions will typically lead to either a 20% win rate, a 50% win rate, or an 80% win rate. So I've kind of come to believe that those are actually the only numbers that exist. And, numbers will go up and down by a few percentages as you win and lose deals, but the general motions will produce those outcomes. And what's fascinating is that almost every single 80% win rate partner that we've ever come across really is maniacally focused on a single industry or specialization. Almost every single 50% win rate partner we've ever come across, which is a very bold statement to make, focuses on 3 or fewer industries proactively. It doesn't mean that they don't chase something that comes in because there's people on the bench or there's an opportunity they think they can win. But if you go to their websites, they really focus on 3 or fewer things. And then almost every single one of the 20% win rate partners that we have ever come across focus on everything. They will sell anything in their scope to every company that will approach them. Right. And so I'm very passionate about this specialization and this focus. So industry is one way to look at it. Workload is another way to look at it, or technology specialization is another way to look at it. But there is an absolute hard correlation between the more focused the partner is, the higher the win rate. And what's also fascinating in that equation is that there's a very similar model when it comes to cost of sale. So the more maniacally focused the partner is, the lower the cost of sale. So when we do work with partners that do sell all things to all people, they generally start with a 1 in 5 win rate, and they generally start with an extremely high cost of sale equation that's unsustainable. And then, of course, the work that we try to do is to try to help them identify, what are those segments that they should focus on, right? So what I think, to bring it back to your question about what's going on in COVID-19 right now, what I think is going to happen is a lot of those 20% win rate organizations that sell everything to everybody, they're going to really struggle through the next 12 to 18 months, differentiating themselves in terms of closing net new business, because I think a lot of IT spending will become discretionary. And those organizations that do have that industry or domain specialization, they're going to be very, very crisp in terms of how they can actually help organizations certainly survive, but ideally grow through this situation. And those are going to be the ones where you're going to see the exponential growth. So if I was a sales rep today, working for a partner, first thing I would do is look at my install base of customers that I've worked with. And even if the business that I worked for didn't believe in industry specialization, I would take it upon myself to become an expert in the industry that I felt I would be most likely coming across on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Any other advice for sales professionals above and beyond what we've talked about so far?
Well, now's the time to be bold, and so, we've all been raised in solution selling. And, many of us that have been in the industry for decades, we've been through multiple versions of it. But at its core, at least as it relates to technology, solution selling is about, tell me what your problem is and tell me how you want to solve it, and then I'll find a way to kind of deliver that solution to you. Right? It's an oversimplification, but solution selling is really about, tell me what you want and I'll build it for you. And I think that is an era that's past, right? Especially in the scenario that we're moving into now, where IT is going to become a nice to have, not a necessary to have, unless it helps an organization move through the challenges that they're experiencing with COVID-19. So I think we've pivoted from a Mr. Customer, tell me what you want and I'll build it for you, to a prescriptive approach where it's, look, I work with a lot of other manufacturing firms. I work with other professional services firms. I understand what you're asking us to do, but what I'd like to do is kind of challenge you on that and share with you a kind of a different approach that you may not have considered. Right. And so the only way to go from reactive solution selling to proactive prescriptive selling is to build up some domain knowledge, some expertise, some narratives, some stories within the industry that you're professing to be an expert in. Right. So that's the biggest piece of advice that I give to candidly to all the sales professionals that we work with, is you got to stop being passive and asking all the questions, and you need to be a little bit more bolder and be more prescriptive in terms of, here's what we see as the best practices in the industry, even though they may not necessarily map to what the customer is asking them to do.
Anything else you would encourage sales professionals to do, like right now?
The one last thing, again, I'll go back to where I started at the beginning of this in terms of, how do you drive emotional connection when the truth is for the next 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, none of us know how long this is going to last. You're not going to be able to physically meet customers and rely upon all of those unconscious relationship building skills that really have helped you for, in many cases, decades, right? So my guidance to them is start to explore the video. So make sure all of your sales calls are with a webcam turned on with the right setting. Start to create more personalized one-to-one videos that deliver very specific messages at certain points inside the sales cycle. But the single biggest thing that I encourage them to do is to experiment with the remote whiteboarding, right? So as long as you've got a touch screen that you can work with, land on a whiteboarding discovery template, right? You can use whiteboarding to deliver proposals. You can use it to deliver, different narratives and storylines. So start to do more and more of your calls in an interactive way. And what happens is at an unconscious level inside the partner's brain, the prospect's brain, what they do is they will unconsciously disclose more because you're tapping into that 9 million instructions per second. That's a little bit more collaborative than what they would normally disclose if you're just asking them questions about their project. You're going to get canned answers. So the sooner you can get them out of the logical brain, which is language, and into the emotional brain, which is visuals, the closer you're going to get to really understanding what it is that they're trying to drive with the project and get a little bit closer to coming up with some kind of unique differentiating solution that really addresses the business problems.
I understand that Neural Impact has been experimenting with or just using the Microsoft Surface. Does it come into play in those kinds of techniques?
Yeah, that's
any review of the Surface so far?
So, it's interesting you bring that up. I'm probably one of the few individuals that actually has a Surface hub in their home office, right? So my entire life as a facilitator, I mentioned I spend a lot of time traveling with partners. Like if we're into a 2-day workshop with the leadership team of a partner, we're going to spend about 80% of that time on a whiteboard mapping out how they collect customers, what their differentiation is, how they design offers, how they assemble their services, all those sorts of things. And so I have to be able to do that exact same body of work remotely. And so we use the Surface Hub extensively, not just from a training perspective, but also from a day-to-day facilitation perspective, right? So I feel so confident and passionate about encouraging sales professionals to use that as a medium to connect to people, because when we're having that conversation and we're whiteboarding and we're brainstorming together, it's a radically different outcome than when we're limited to a Teams call where all we have is auditory to work with.
Neural Impact also been doing work with Ingram Micro and their partners. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been working with Ingram over the course of the past year to really help them build up a toolkit and a business model and an infrastructure to help partners close more Dynamics deals faster. Right. So Neural Impact, we were quite fortunate. We were on the early, I don't know if we were fortunate, but we're on the pointy end of the spear when it came to business model transformation in the cloud. Right, we were on the pointy end of the spear when it came to creating repeatable sales processes, and I personally created the early remote selling methodologies for the Dynamics partners to support the early releases of Business Central. And so we've been taking a lot of what we learned over the years, working with partners and helping some of the top performing partners globally who do have repeatable remote customer acquisition engines, and we're building those same tools for Ingram Micro. Right. So partners that are interested now in optimizing how they sell remotely, they're looking for tools and assets and strategies to collect their customers when they don't have the ability to necessarily meet them face to face. Ingram is putting that whole library of tools together for them. And we've been a big part of helping them create those.
Excellent. Well, Mark, it's been great chatting with you today, getting a chance to hear some of the work that you've been doing during this important time. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Hey, Jason, I really appreciate the invitation to come on and share some of the things that we've learned kind of working with some of the best performing partners in the Microsoft ecosystem with this community. Thanks so much.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Mark Stuyt for joining me today. To learn more about today's sponsor, Ingram Micro Cloud, and their partner services, please visit microsoft.ingrammicrocloud.com/dynamics. That's microsoft.ingrammicrocloud.com/dynamics. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.